This is CS 124, Lesson 2.3, Loop Syntax. To understand what is being taught, today you should be familiar with converting logic problems into Boolean expressions, and you should know how to generate pseudocode corresponding to a C++ function. Today's video will teach you the correct syntax for a while, do while, and for loop. Loops are useful for solving programming problems. Loops are a tool that allow a program to execute the same section of code multiple times. This functionality may seem irrelevant to you right now, but you'll find loops are useful for counting operations, program timing, and code repetition. There are three types of loops in C++: while, do while, and for loops. As expected, while loops require the command while. This command should be followed by a Boolean expression containing parentheses, which is followed by the body statement. The body statement is the code to be executed if the Boolean expression evaluates true. In our first example, the loop will continue to execute until a value greater than 0 is entered as the input. Note that more than one body statement can be used by adding curly braces before and after the body statements. In this example, the numbers 1 through 10 will be displayed on the screen. After count is incremented to 11, the Boolean is false, so the loop ceases to execute. The while loop will continue repeating the code in the body statement as long as the Boolean expression evaluates true. We're going to take a moment to review the example we just looked at. First of all, we need our variable. Next, we'll set up our while loop. We have the command while, followed by the Boolean expression. What we want the body to do is output the number that is contained in the variable count. And then we want to increment count by 1. As expected, we got 0, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through the number 10. Because 10 is the last number that is less than 0, that is the last number we should have seen on the screen. The next loop we want to talk about is the do while loop. It is essentially the same as the while loop, except the Boolean expression is checked at the end of the body statement. This means that the body statement will execute once before we know the result of the Boolean equation. So even if our equation returns false, the code in the loop gets executed at least once. If the Boolean equation in a while loop is evaluated false, none of the code would get executed. The do while loop can be especially useful when prompting for input. In this example, the user is prompted for their age. The while statement at the end ensures that if they put in a negative age, we will prompt again until we get a valid value. To understand the benefit of a do while loop, we're first going to set up our problem in a while loop. Remember, the objective here is to get a positive age from the user and to reject a negative input. First of all, we need our variable. Then we'll set up our while loop. While age is less than 0, prompt for age. If we run this code on its own, we'll find that nothing happens. Because 0 is greater than 0, this expression evaluated false, and therefore was never run. That means that we need to have this exact same code copied up here. So now we have two copies of the exact same code in order to get our program to run right. Because it's not good style to have two copies of the code, we're going to use the do while loop. The first thing we need to do is put our while loop down below, and make sure you add a semicolon at the end of it, because it's the end of a command. Your while loop can either go here on the same line as a curly brace or down here. Make sure you add the command do before your statement. Now if we run it, we find that no matter what age is initialized to, we will always get prompted for age. The final loop we will discuss today is the for loop. It is different from the other two loops because it requires 3 fields inside of its parentheses. This looks really confusing, so we'll talk through an example. Keep in mind that the for loop is specifically designed for counting, which is why 3 fields are necessary. Inside the parentheses, we first have the initialization statement. This declares and initializes variables inside the loop. Typically, the letters I or J are used. You can declare more than one variable, but two variables should be separated by a comma. In addition, a variable that has been declared outside of the for loop can be reinitialized inside the for statement. This section can also be left blank if you already have variables declared to use for incrementing and comparing. Next comes the Boolean expression. This can be any expression, and you do not have to use the same variable that you use for incrementing, although this is typically the case. The Boolean expression must evaluate true for the loop to continue. If this spot is left empty, it automatically evaluates true, causing the loop to continue on forever. This is called an infinite loop. When carefully handled, infinite loops can be useful, but usually creating one will cause your program to crash. The last thing in the parentheses is the increment operation. Usually, a variable is incremented or decremented here. You can operate on multiple variables, or the section can be left empty. To remember these fields, just keep in mind you need a place to start, a place to stop, and you need to know how much to count by. For our final example, we're simply going to use a for loop to count to 10. So first we have the command for. Then we're going to declare a variable. We'll call it I, and start at 0. We're going to do while I is less than 11, increment I by 1. And then cout I, followed by a new line. We got the numbers 0 through 10 on the screen. We can change a couple things like initializing I outside of the loop, in which case we could leave this blank. When we run the program, we still get the same output. It's just a matter of where you declare your variables. We're now going to have a short quiz to make sure that you understand the material. There will be a countdown for each question, but feel free to pause if you need more time to consider what's going on. You will have 5 questions and 5 seconds for each question. Which of the following is not a loop? That would be if. If is a conditional statement, not a loop. Which loop will always evaluate at least once? Because the do-while loop doesn't check the Boolean expression until after the body text has been executed, the body text is always evaluated at least once. Which loop is designed for counting? The for loop is specifically designed for counting. What is the output of the following code? Because the variable I is only declared within the scope of the for loop, we would get an error if we tried to run this code. What is the output of the following code? The loop only executes twice before I is incremented to the value 3 and the Boolean expression evaluates false. Therefore, J is 12. That's the end of our quiz and today's lecture.